So what I'm going to do is just go through these guideposts from the reading and just talk about each one, and then we can have some discussion on what questions you might have about what I say. So the first one there says, humans are thought beings and can find their path to knowledge only when thought is their starting point. I'm going to go ahead and read the second one because it's important, I think, in terms of explaining the first. Thought is a living force and a direct expression of what is seen in spirit. And so I will just begin with saying, what is thought from Steiner or Anthroposophy's point of view? And thought really is the way that the activity of spiritual beings becomes awake in our consciousness. And what I said last about becoming awake is very important, because the spiritual beings are, activity of spiritual beings is working on us in ways that aren't awake also. They're working in our unconscious will. I mean, the forces are streaming in all the time. But thought in particular is the way we become awake to that activity. It's thought. I believe it's in Study of Man, where Steiner is explaining the relationship between thought and antipathy. And it's really a way it's really a way we are resisting. We resist the impressions, or we resist the activity. We develop, it's the antipathy for the activity that creates the impression. Think of it as if you go see a track in the mud road where a car has been. And so where, in a sense, the weight of the car was resisted, that's what creates the track. It's the resistance to it that creates the track. And so we're pushing it back, but when we push back, it's a way of knowing those beings. When we push back against them, it's a way we know it. It's like being blind and using our hands and walking up to someone and touching them. And then we know them through the impressions that we get in trying to touch them. We can get a sense of the shape of the face. So that's sort of what's happening. We aren't really able to perceive the beings directly in thought, but we sort of, in a dark place, are able to get impressions of this activity. And this is actually what thinking is for us, or what our thought life is composed of. It's composed of these impressions of the activity. And that's how we become awake to the activity of the spiritual beings. Now, because we are individuals, we and are constituted in a certain way, etherically and astrally and egoically. Each of our impressions are different. Each of the way that we are impressed and become awake to the activity of the spiritual beings is going to be unique for all of us, depending on maybe what our destinies might be. And so it can be, and the other thing is that we're going to be affected by our environment, the physical world as well. So we have actually two forces which are working against our objectivity. We have our own individuality, our own unique constitution. And then we have the influences of our environment on us. Each of these are going to put us in a certain relationship with the spiritual beings, like we're going to see them from a certain perspective. We're not going to have an objective view of them. And so if we want to And so basically another way to look at this first guidepost, humans are thought beings and can find their path to knowledge only when thought is their starting point. Another way of saying that is that our whole constitution is dependent on this streaming into our being of the activity of other spiritual beings. I mean, we are thought beings in that sense, you know. But when we have, in a sense, we can say we also are spiritual beings, and we have three relationships with spiritual activity. We are either asleep, in a dream state, or in a waking state. In what we consider our physical body, in our will activity, we are asleep. In our feeling realm, we are dreaming and have a dream impression of the spiritual activity that streams into us. And in our so-called thoughting or thinking, we are awake. We are awake. And I mentioned in the previous session about how the more etheric activity, the more living blood quality in our physical being, the least awake we can be. The least awake we can be.
Can you say that one more time, please?
Well, it's not even, the blood is actually in the middle of it. We have basically the nerves, the blood, and I'll say the sinew. It's like three sort of tissue qualities in the body. We are asleep in what I will call the tissues or the sinew. You know, the musculature things, the tissues and the organs, you know. On this level, we are asleep. We're not conscious of any of those activities taking place. And Steiner says it would be quite, if we became conscious in this, he says it would be like hellfire. We would experience hellfire if we became conscious in that aspect of our being. We have to be asleep for those energies to be penetrating us on those levels. In the blood, actually, we are in a dreaming kind of place. In a certain sense, we are aware of our heartbeat. You know, it's there. We can bring it to consciousness. You know, we can be a little bit aware of that activity in our bodies. You know, and then in the nerves, we can be fully awake. It's not fully awake, but as awake as we are as individuals, and so that's where we can experience these impressions of the spiritual beings. We think they're our own activity completely, and we call them our thoughts, but they're impressions. Now, as you start really disciplining your thinking, what happens? You do begin to think, these are not just my thoughts, they apply objectively to the world. That's what happens. First we think, this is just our own capacity, and it only relates to our activity, but then we begin to recognize that no, these thoughts actually, if we discipline these and order these in a certain way, we begin to notice that they somehow seem to have an existence out from us. We find that, if there's a law here that I can actually make predictions about the external world based on these thoughts that I had. And so we begin to be able to, with these awake impressions, begin able to find out these impressions seem to express a reality that is outside of ourselves. In science, they develop a whole, what I call, Steiner calls metaphysical realism about what's going on in the world that reflects these laws. And they model it with things like atoms and whatnot. From the point of view of spiritual science, now there are beings which are actually living, and that we're in a relationship with these beings, and that all of this is the creative activity of the universe that we are actually getting impressions about in our own consciousness. And it's not these hard, objective, non-being things interacting for reasons that are totally unclear and come into and create out of accident. We have this picture now of this creative activity that is directed and is intentional in the world. The imparting of this expression acts as a germ that brings forth from itself the fruit of knowledge. Now, what Steiner is saying here is that if I share with you my thoughts, what happens when, and this is in the sense he's saying this is what happens because when I share with you my thoughts as a spiritual being, I begin to ray into you in a certain way, almost in a way that these other spiritual beings, unseen spiritual beings, ray into us too. And this is very important. This is sort of a fundamental theosophical concept, is that this is the whole reason we have birth and death, is that a thought can only enter into another. Spiritual beings can only ray into each other as seed, as kernel. I can't take my whole thought. Oh, I got this great idea, and impress it upon you in a way that then you are left like a cast of my thought. When I give you the thought, and if that happens, then it actually is the end of your own thinking. The only way my thinking can live in your thinking is as seed. Think about, you always are like earth. And the only way that I can grow anything is to bring it into you as seed. And then out of your own activity, it grows into whatever it's intended to be. I can never put the tree in you fully grown. We do that, we have to stop. Our own thinking has to stop. Something just occurred to me actually. When I talked earlier about how we have to be asleep in the real physical world, I think in that case, spiritual beings are pouring more into us that is already developed.
What?
Remember I said before, I think our own thinking has to stop the more another spiritual being is pouring their capacities into us. And so we have to be asleep in that. But the normal way for thoughts to be impressed upon us is as seeds. And then those seeds in our own thinking grow and flower. Now, I would say that's the ideal situation. I think a lot of times we relate to the world out of it looking for authority. We want to hold thoughts. And we have to then suspend our own thinking. We have to suspend our own thinking if we want to get the whole thought from without ourselves. Our thinking can only continue if we always look for the kernel. So when you're listening to me, you're reading Steiner, to each other, you should be trying to hear the kernel the person's giving you. And then work on that kernel, that seed yourself. Not trying to understand the full flowering of their own thought that they're offering you. They, in a sense, just like a plant. So in a sense, when we are sharing our thought, it's like each of us is a realized blossom. And we're just then scattering our seeds to other people. And then those seeds land in other people, and then they grow again, uniquely. And that is the way that actually thinking and spiritual activity has to be transmitted from being to being, only as seed.